Vegan protests have hit the headlines today. Are they effective? Vegans undoubtedly have a right to protest for their cause, but in the wake of this morning's Flinders Street blockage, some are asking, what was the point?
Yeah, awareness, definitely a tick there. Recruitment, we're not really sure. Sympathy for the cause, possibly a big miss. Plenty took to social media to vent their frustration at being bombarded with both guilt and a commuting delay. For tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Shivani, Gopal, CEO of The Remarkable Woman, and Scott Phillips, Chief Investment Officer at the Motley. Thank you both very much for being with us. Now, we've got to treat this one a little bit carefully, I guess. But look, yeah, they were all over the country today, really having a massive go. Do you think it was effective? Do you think that they proved their point that they were trying to?
Depending on what their source of success really was. Was it to raise awareness of veganism? Was it to enrage the country and those who actually do eat meat? And you've really got to think about your sort of cause and effect there, because what's really happened is a whole bunch of people have gotten really irritated, and Australians by and large are actually against animal cruelty. So if your cause is, look, I want you to change your diet, I want you to be more aware about the pros and cons of veganism, and I want you to take a look at this documentary, they really could have gone about it in better ways than blocking up traffic and making it harder for ambulances, for example, to get to hospitals. And importantly, you don't want to annoy people on a Monday morning without their coffee.
Monday morning.
Exactly, and people just don't like being told what to do. They don't like being judged. So if you do want to raise awareness for veganism, do it in an inclusive and educative format, not one in which you're completely blocking traffic and going through farms and making them close shop. Really.
A pretty grating way to deliver a message, that's for sure.
Indeed.
For sure, combining Monday morning with 4 hours of protesting in one of the busiest intersections in Melbourne. Also, people pointing out, just because you're vegan doesn't mean you're a kind of extreme animal activist. You can't interchange the two terms. But this is where it gets really sensitive, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, let's get the real meat of the issue here. And Monday afternoon. So they went out there and they decided to stake their claims, and that's an important thing. That's it. I'm done. Look, I agree with you. What I thought was interesting was they tried. It's one thing to make your point, right? But we know that being confrontational actually pushes people further back into their corners. You don't win any points. A great quote from the behavioural economist Amos Tversky that I heard today on a podcast was, he said, "I've won 1,000 arguments, but never convinced anybody." And so he knew he was right. And so if I say, I'm absolutely right, I can prove to you that I'm right and here's why. But if I haven't changed your mind, I've completely wasted my time, your time, and I've probably made you less open to the idea in the first place, right? Because next time it comes up, it's now against, those vegans, And so you start to really cement people's views in their, the vegans and the people who are so passionate about this stuff already believe it, right? They're already there, they're in the camp. Those who are already not, are not. And those in between are saying, to Shivani's point, well, I kind of get where you guys are coming from, but you've annoyed me, you've stopped me in traffic. I don't feel any more necessarily kind of, mindful that I want to join your cause because of the way you've done this. I think there's ways and means of doing this stuff, but you've got to, it's the old lead the horse to water problem. You've got to do that sensitively and helpfully and get them, to Shivani's point, create the empathy in the first place rather than confronting people. If there's stuff you want to make a point of and you want to get attention, that's fine. But out of today's protest, has anyone seen anything new, any new information that's led you to change your mind, right? The answer is no. I know they've protested. I know they're all black and white signs. That's kind of about it, right? And so
that a whole bunch of people were really ticked off.
Right. So there's just no reason to join the cause. In fact, there's more people not.
It reminds me of another great man who I don't know his name, he's on Twitter today, and he said, sarcastically, thousands of people have converted to veganism today because of being, inconvenienced in Melbourne's traffic this morning. Like, right.
That's exactly the point, right?
They're shooting so high. When it comes to onlookers, it's not sort of, hey, maybe you could dial back your meat consumption because it's better for the environment, you wouldn't have to see so many animals die. But instead it's this all or nothing thing that so many people took to Twitter to say, you know what, I'm getting stuck into my burger today. They've just sent them completely the other direction. To your point before,
a couple examples
sitting back in the corner. So there were some pretty funny ones. Look,
it was humorous.
It was.
Well, look, it was humorous because that's where, social media takes off and, depending on which side you're on, you kind of enjoy it or hate it. But there was something funny from the Batuta Advocate who said that the protests were in fact losing momentum because those activists had to start napping due to their iron deficiencies. And then one other
hilarious.
We like that one. And then some other smart ass putting up this photo of the burger, I think that's coming and just piled with the bacon and the meat, about 1 metre high, and then there was a tiny bit of lettuce on the bottom and said, "Is there enough lettuce?" Yeah, exactly. So
Too much lettuce.
Yeah.
It doesn't help their cause, though, does it? That you know, so many vegans are actually coming out, getting caught eating fish, and being told by their doctors, "Well, you really need to be, increasing your meat intake because otherwise you're going to start losing energy and attention spans."
Well, we will move on, but there was something quite constructive as a kind of a takeout, I thought, from someone who was commenting on. Actually, there was another kind of serious side story to all of that. Yesterday, there was a Gippsland Goat Cafe, who'd had to close its doors because these animal activists had been protesting basically non-stop since December. They'd had a kind of a farm attached to the cafe, and they said basically due to this constant harassment for the safety of staff and basically the people who work there, they'd had to close the cafe down. And someone was saying it would have been much more constructive to work with that cafe on vegan options, kind of coming to some kind of middle ground rather than harassing them to a point where they just shut their doors. That doesn't achieve anything for either side. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It wouldn't about a losing the war thing, right? So that cafe's closed. There's probably half a dozen activists celebrating the closure, and fair enough.
Yep.
But the rest of us are talking about it, feeling more sympathy for the cafe who's been harassed into closing than actually the people who, even though they may well have a point. We're all against factory farming. Anyone's reasonably saying treat animals however you want. Should there be better conditions for animals? Probably, yeah. Yes. But now I'm in a place of, well, all I'm seeing is the headline of people being treated unreasonably by some activists, as opposed to me feeling more, open to the cause they're campaigning for.
Yeah. Right, now, moving on. If the interviewee doesn't write you a thank you email, don't hire them. It's a simple rule from an executive manager that has sparked some online debate today. How important is this courtesy if you want the job? Shivani, what do you think about the thank you email after an interview?
I'm a huge advocate of the thank you email, and I do agree to a certain point around this. I think a thank you email shows a lot of care, and it shows your interest as well, and you're verifying it again. And I think you can get really creative on how you do the thank you email. It's so important that you don't just write, "Thank you, Chris and Brooke, for your time today. It was wonderful spending time with you, and hope to hear from you next week." I think that's simply not good enough. If you are going to do a thank you email, tell them what you enjoyed most about the meeting, what you learnt that you were surprised about, and what you now feel you can add further value to that you didn't get a chance to mention in the email. And if you want to, in the interview rather, and if you want to go a step further, then I would always say, by the way, something that we talked about or joked about or referred to reminded me of an article that I read. I thought you might like to have a quick squiz and send it off. It shows a little bit more of initiative and also how cultured you are and how well read you are. What I disagree with, however, is that necessarily you don't need to take everyone off your shortlist if they don't send you a thank you email.
Not immediate disqualifier if you don't get it.
It's not an immediate disqualifier. Look, it's certainly the right thing to do, but it's also vice versa. Remember that the glass box culture is on the rise now. Your culture internally is now being openly available to be viewed by everyone else, and that is just as important as you finding the right candidate. So you should also be sending a thank you email.
Right. So should be doing it, but not necessarily a total, defeatist approach if you don't.
Yeah, I think this is. I read this twice when I first saw the article today. To some degree, it's like it's terrible hiring advice, but it's great interviewing advice. To Shivani's point, like I don't know if I'm going to guess. I'd say maybe less than half the people I've eventually hired for jobs have sent me a thank you email after the interview, right? And I've hired some fantastic people. And if I'd culled just those people out of my hiring process because they didn't send me a thank you email, I would have missed out on some of the best people I've worked with. So it doesn't stack up, right? This lady, again, the other thing is the counterfactual isn't there. She doesn't know what she's missing out on by taking that decision. She feels like it's better. It's all that kind of confirmation bias of, well, I feel clever because I've got a good team and I did this. Who did she miss out on in the process, right? So for me, if I'd have done that, it would have been terrible. To Shivani's point, I think it's a great way. Interviewing it's a competitive process, right? And it's whatever you can do to make yourself seem like the best candidate, to remain top of mind with the interviewers. You've probably all been in interview panels, right? By the time you do the 25th person, you're struggling to remember who the first person was, let alone what they were good for, let alone how they compare with the others. And you're trying to already combat the fact that, well, I remember the last three people, so they're going to be higher in my mind. I might remember the first two because they were the first two that made an impression on me. The ones in the middle I've kind of forgotten about because there are so many. The follow-up email is just a matter of saying, hey, don't forget about me. Remember, I'm here. And to Shivani's point, add some value back.
Yes.
And then, without even thinking about it, that person's already top of mind for me as I'm going through the applicants. So as an interviewee, it's a great strategy to make sure you're at the top of the list or towards the top of the list, and a much better chance of either getting the job or getting a follow-up interview than someone who just drops out of that person's memory the second they've walked out the door.
So, okay, then, when's the perfect time to send the follow-up email? Is it the next day, the next week? I want to know.
Yeah, the next
Asking
day.
for a friend,
Way
Chris?
too interested in this topic.
It's interesting. I think it's deeply interesting. You got to know how to be a good interviewee, right?
Yeah, look, let them breathe, let it simmer in, what it is that you've just talked about, and let them reflect. But the next day is always the best time to do it. Certainly, if for any reason you couldn't do it the next day, make sure you do it before the week is over. So if your interview's on a Wednesday and you couldn't do it on a Thursday, you must be done by the Friday. If you do it by the Monday, it does look a bit like an afterthought and a little bit lazy. Certainly better than not doing one at all. But the next day is the best way.
All right, hot cross buns is the next topic because they're being mucked around with. Have you noticed? Going through the supermarkets this year, you might see white chocolate and raspberry hot cross buns or banana versions. Traditionalists are livid. And who's to blame? Well, ask Coles. Coles themselves said it's millennials. They like to kind of do the traditional thing but have their own take.
I
their
knew it.
modern
I
day
knew it was the
twist.
millennials.
Didn't you know it?
You're looking around
I knew you were going to say that, Scott.
Disclaimer, I'm no traditionalist because I absolutely piled up on hot cross buns on the Australia Day weekend when I saw them, and I thought, fantastic, long weekend, hot cross buns for all. Love a hot cross bun. I only do the fruit though. So, Scott Phillips, should we be not mucking around with hot cross buns? Is this the...
Well, I'm torn here, right? Because there's a traditional hot cross bun, there's the fruit hot cross bun,
Yes.
and there's the one with the choc chips. And that's kind of that's an established variety, right? But it still was kind of right. So it's been here for a couple of years. It's no raspberry.
Go
muffin.
ask your local baker if that is an established hot cross bun.
So I figured that's okay. So I have my limits. I think there's some way you could go towards improving on the hot cross bun. Raspberry hot cross buns leave me cold. I got to tell you, that's just weird. I don't understand that, right? And it's one of those things. A bit like people say, I want to buy Australian made, then no one actually does. It's like the thing about Christmas. People say, oh, Christmas over. Oh, here's the first hot cross. Isn't that terrible? As they're sticking the packs of hot cross buns in the trolley, right? So we all pretend we care. It's this big issue that we all want to ramp out on social media. Meanwhile, we think, oh, that's good. I'll go and buy one of those on the weekend. I won't tell anyone about it. It's kind of the equivalent of my mother does the Easter shopping months in advance, right?
Yeah,
and then slowly works through the Easter eggs a couple of times before it gets
That's
to
right.
Easter. So that's that's the way of stocking up the cupboard and making sure there's enough to get through some of the leaner times between now and Easter.
That's exactly right.
Do what works,
Shivani?
Shivani.
Yeah, first of all, why are we blaming millennials for everything? I mean, they went the slippery slope the minute they went to, chocolate chip, and here we have a very clear non-millennial vouching for it.
Very clear. Very clear non-millennial. Thank you very much.
So, it was a slippery slope, and of course they were going to go down to banana and caramel and, raspberry and white chocolate and whatnot. So, power to them. I think it's great. Clearly there's a demand for it. I think the banana one sounds great. I do like the traditional hot cross bun, but why not extend it? And frankly, there are some sacred things that are also being extended via product variations as well. I mean, the Cadbury cream egg, which is a staple for Easter. We have Cadbury cream egg ice cream, These things have to continue.
Bun ice cream in Woolworths.
True, and I'm sure there are lots of people who are outraged about that.
While they're spooning their mouths watching us on TV.
Exactly. It's not like the whole millennial generation has stolen all of the hot cross buns and plonked a raspberry one down in front of you. That's your bloody hot cross bun this year, mate. No, I think it's so funny.
There's nothing sacred, Chris. Why do the millennials want to destroy everything that we hold dear?
Are the worst.
They smashed our avocados. They're putting raspberry on hot cross buns.
I'll have you know, my research today leads me to inform you all that the reign of Queen Elizabeth back in 1592, there was so special and sacred you couldn't sell hot cross buns except for burials, Good Friday and Christmas, and if you broke that you had to give all the buns to the poor for your punishment. So there you go.
In summary, I'm hopping mad.
Oh God, time's up. What do you know? Thank you very much, Scott Phillips. Shivani, Gopal, thank you guys. We appreciate that.